for Johnston.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is a tragic day for the most vulnerable children in the Territory. Today, here in this chamber, we have the opportunity to fix the very real and very deep issues in the child protection system, and the government has wasted it with a law that the overwhelming evidence has explicitly told the government will not work and will put children at risk. Mr Deputy Speaker, our first duty in this chamber is to protect children, and that's why today is so important. And by passing this law today, the government is directly and abjectly failing children by refusing to listen to the evidence that's been provided to them about how to actually make children safer by an overwhelming number of frontline workers, of community representatives, of legal services, of experts and of children themselves. Mr Deputy Speaker, it's a tragedy and it's heartbreaking, and we're going to see children harmed by this decision. Every single person who submitted to the inquiry on this bill was trying desperately to get the government to do something that will actually improve the lives of the children in the Northern Territory, and they know more than anyone what needs to happen. Their advice could not be more valuable. It's based on deep knowledge, experience and expertise about the system that we're here debating today. Mr Deputy Speaker, we just heard from the member for Mulca that this is the worst bill that he has seen in 10 years, that he has seen a lot of damaging bills, but that this is the worst that he has seen, that he is angry and devastated that the people in this chamber are making decisions about the removal of his people's children without the decency to talk to him, to talk to the community, to work with them, to listen to their solutions to fix the problem. The member for Mulca has stood in this chamber for 10 years and has said over and over again, with incredible wisdom, with grace, with patience and with generosity, that we need to work together. As he said today, that's not a hard thing to say. I'm only asking you to listen to us and work with us. That is not an invitation that has been accepted, Mr Deputy Speaker. Madam Speaker, Aboriginal communities know what is best for Aboriginal children. They have the solutions, but instead of taking the opportunity to listen and to make real change, this government has ignored, sidelined and vilified them. I also want to talk about the fact that we're here debating a child protection law on the same day that a review into Child Protection commissioned by the government has handed down its findings, and that review made exactly the same findings and the same recommendations as the 120 people who submitted with concerns about this bill, opposing this bill, did to the Scrutiny Committee. The key problem is not that the current law lacks powers. The key problems are delayed responses, overwhelming workloads, workforce shortages, weak governance and a system that is already stretched far beyond capacity. These are the problems that are placing children at risk, and this bill fixes none of them. And then yesterday, in an extraordinary and almost unprecedented move, every child protection minister in Australia, except Queensland and here in the Northern Territory, issued a joint statement expressing concern about these reforms. Ministers from the Commonwealth, from New South Wales, from Victoria, from South Australia, from Western Australia, from Tasmania and the ACT publicly reaffirmed that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander child placement principle supports children's safety. It does not undermine it. They described these reforms as a regrettable divergence from nationally agreed child protection principles. The SNAIC Chief Executive Catherine Little said this kind of united intervention from governments around Australia is virtually unheard of. She warned that alarm bells should be ringing throughout the Northern Territory government because it has got things horribly wrong. Madam Speaker, when your own Scrutiny Committee warns against this legislation, when your own independent review says the problem is not the legislation, when frontline experts tell you this bill will make children less safe, when Aboriginal organisations plead with you not to weaken protections, and when almost every child protection minister in Australia publicly tells you that you are heading in the wrong direction, at what point do you stop and listen? Instead, this government has chosen to press ahead regardless. That is not evidence-based lawmaking, that is ideology. And the consequences of ideology in child protection are not theoretical, they're measured in children's lives. Madam Speaker, I also struggle to reconcile the government's repeated claim that child safety is its highest priority with the decisions that the government has made over the last week. Today, we're debating sweeping changes to the child protection system despite the overwhelming evidence that this bill in its current form will not make children safer. At the same time, the government's announced the closure of Youth's Emergency Accommodation Service, placing more than 150 children and their families at greater risk of homelessness. Madam Speaker, we know that stable housing keeps children safe. We know homelessness places families under enormous stress and increases contact with the child protection system and makes it harder for children to thrive. And later this week, here in this chamber, we'll be debating legislation abolishing the Northern Territory's only independent Child Death Review and Prevention Committee, leaving 144 child deaths unreviewed with no clear plan of when or how that will happen, and leaving the Northern Territory the only place in Australia without an independent Child Death Review Committee. Madam Speaker, the pattern is devastatingly clear. A pattern of weakening the systems that protect children instead of strengthening them, a pattern of removing independent scrutiny instead of embracing it, a pattern that says child safety is the highest priority while making decisions that undermine the very systems that children rely on. I also want to address the CLP members who consistently mislead this chamber when they claim that the safety of children is not the paramount consideration under the existing Act. Madam Speaker, the best interests of the child, which includes safety, are already the paramount consideration under the current Care and Protection of Children Act. When the CLP suggests otherwise, they are deliberately misleading the public and the Parliament to justify a bill that is not based on evidence. Madam Speaker, we've also heard that the overwhelming opposition to this bill comes with no solutions, and nothing could be further from the truth. The CLP says if you have the solutions, put them on the table. Madam Speaker, 120 submitters put the solutions on the table, and 120 times the government ignored them. So, Madam Speaker, there is no argument that this system is in crisis, but as the government has heard repeatedly in the Scrutiny Committee inquiry, the Act is not the problem. No government should politicise children's safety. I think we've heard that from across the chamber today. And the overwhelming number of people who've raised concerns about this bill have been accused of being driven by ideology, and some have been incredibly accused of moral bankruptcy or of not caring about children when they are working every single day for the safety of children. They are not the ones being driven by ideology, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, like everyone in this chamber, I have personal stories and personal connections with children who've been removed, with children in care, including in my own family, and my heart breaks for families who will bear the consequences of this decision that we are making here today. These children deserve a government who will listen to the people who knows this system best and who have offered a genuine path to better outcomes for safety for all children. Madam Speaker, when the Minister said yesterday in the NT News public scrutiny makes legislation stronger after ignoring the entire sector and communities who spent weeks detailing the safety risks to children introduced by this bill, this is deeply disturbing. I'm curious about what this means. Which public scrutiny has made this legislation stronger? This government has been told clearly what needs to happen, and it's been told again today by its own review. If the government listened to frontline workers, communities and experts, they would have implemented their critical advice to address chronic under-resourcing with adequate and sustained funding, to prioritise community-led solutions, to confront the systemic disadvantage caused by failure of governments over decades. And Madam Speaker, even the small minority of people who supported this bill gave evidence that it can only work if there are more resources. Yet we heard from the department that there will be no resources, that they were very comfortable and that there was a large and well-resourced organisation, once again directly contradicted by the Shanahan-Webb review. Madam Speaker, we're talking here about families who are having their children removed because they can't get access to housing, because the public housing waiting list is 10 to 16 years long. They're unable to access support services because there are hardly any beds for alcohol and other drug treatment here in the Northern Territory, and they're given conditions to meet DCF requirements which are impossible to meet. We heard so many stories about this during the inquiry process. I'll just share one here. A woman who fled domestic violence with her two children to a Darwin tenancy program built for exactly that purpose, and her partner turned up. The children witnessed that violence, and as a result, that was reported to the department and the children were removed. The tenancy program then evicted the mother because without the children in her care, she no longer met the program's criteria. The department then said reunification was impossible because she had nowhere to live with her children. Madam Speaker, this is not a family that failed the system. This is a system that has failed a family. This story and the many tragedies like it are manufactured by subsequent governments' failure, and it doesn't have to be like this. Madam Speaker, because I have listened to the evidence, I cannot support this bill in its current form. However, I will be moving amendments based directly on the evidence that was given to the Scrutiny Committee. My amendments are an attempt to guard against the harm that witnesses consistently warned that this bill could cause, the harm to children, the children that we are all here to protect. They seek to preserve important safeguards, to strengthen children's rights and better reflect the evidence provided by those who work every single day to keep Territory children safe. I've circulated all these amendments to all members for their information and consideration because children deserve the people elected to look after them to be making the very best laws we can, laws built on evidence, laws not on ideology. Madam Speaker, the government knows the consequences of this bill. They have been told unequivocally by experts here in the Territory and across the country that it will not make children safer, that it risks funneling more and more children into institutional care, exposing them to harm and trauma. It risks preventing children from reunifying with their families by placing an arbitrary 2-year cut-off on reunification. Madam Speaker, when governments make laws that impact children, they must think about how this decision will change their whole lives. So today in this chamber, we had an opportunity to actually make every child safer in the Northern Territory, and we are abjectly, shamefully failing. Madam Speaker, I support the safety of children and young people, and that is exactly why I cannot support this bill today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.